So do you add the stream?
There we are.
That's it. Perfect.
Hello, we're here. It's sorted. I'm Hugh Smith. This is Jordan Bradfield. I'm your associate here at Chamberlains Law Firm in the Canberra office.
I'm a senior lawyer, also in the Canberra office.
How exciting. Thank you for joining us. Hi, Amina. How are you? Today, we're here to talk about essentially advocacy and COVID and the effects that COVID has had upon said advocacy. Jordan and I are in court. You'll see us in the ACT courts most days. You'll see us in New South Wales courts from time to time when the borders are open, when we're not in lockdown. So what we'll do really is talk about our experiences in advocacy and how that has been affected in COVID over the last few years. And I guess we'll move on to what we think the effect will be in the long term moving forward. So Jordan, take me back. Take me back. It's early 2020. You're bright-eyed. You're bushy-tailed. You're keen for a good year.
Feeling good.
You've got matters in court every day, every second day, and all of a sudden, March, it's lockdown. How do you feel? What happens?
It was an interesting time, Hugh. I think it was pretty much tools down. I don't think anyone knew what was going to happen at that stage. I think you and I were actually speaking the day of, saying, I reckon it's going to look like a month. And we went straight back at it, straight back into court. I remember I was actually preparing for quite a large New South Wales Court of Appeal matter. And we're on speaking to counsel and senior counsel every day going, how is this going to look?
Yes.
And eventually came to the stage where we go, it's all going to be online. This is all going to be on Zoom. And these counsels are just blowing up going, there's no way. There's no way this is going to be able to work in a federal court with 5 federal court judges watching us on a video camera. And I don't know, it ended up being okay. I think the first directions hearing I was in the ACT was pretty funny. We had people we had older lawyers who came in essentially and were just yelling over everyone because they hadn't sorted out WebEx yet.
Oh,
so it ended up being a pretty funny occasion on the first few times.
Yes.
What about you? What were your feelings? What were your moods?
I was relieved, to be honest, first of all, because I had a big case the next day, really, and it didn't go ahead. So I was like, well, that buys me some time. And then the second I started speaking to the client, they're like, well, you know, what's going to happen? And the answer is, I don't know. Which brings me to an issue that we had at the ACT, and I think to an extent in New South Wales from what I recall, which is that all of a sudden enforcement proceedings were just stayed indefinitely.
Yeah.
So, you know, you could have had a debt that arose before COVID, a judgment that you got before COVID, enforcement proceedings that you commenced before COVID. And all of a sudden, it's like, too bad, courts are closed. If you want to go to an enforcement hearing, it is not happening because of COVID. So I think that there was great difficulty in that regard because it was such a blow to normal case management and case strategy.
Yeah.
And then your other option, I suppose, is, you know, bankruptcy notices. And as we know, that became not an option as well. So it had a great effect upon the case management, case strategy, whether or not you advise clients to file early or do more negotiations, but then at the same time, if negotiations have concluded and essentially failed, what do you do at this point? So I found that quite frustrating.
Are those enforcement proceedings still, are they catching up to those now?
They've caught up. I was thinking this morning, I think that they've caught up quite quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, in the ACT, we have less of a backlog than in other jurisdictions.
Yeah.
You know, we got there eventually.
We did.
And I feel like we're back in action.
I know the registry was standing there for a while. I think what was it, actually, they did get the online lodgement going, which is nice. That's long overdue in the ACT. I was actually thinking about that this morning.
For those of us from different jurisdictions, New South Wales especially, we do not have online lodgement in the ACT.
We do now.
We do now.
For specific documents, very specific documents. There was a few documents the other day that I realised I had to actually run down myself because they don't accept those specific ones. But other than that, balls are rolling in the ACT.
Exactly.
Now here, which is nice to see.
We're very fancy. We don't believe in the UCPR, but we're back.
We're back somewhere. Yeah, no, I think it's been interesting. I think overall, it's changed the complexion of what we're doing in the courtroom. I think for a lot of I think what you were saying with procedures, right? I think first directions hearing online are fantastic.
Yeah.
I spent an hour and a half in the court yesterday waiting for my matter to get listed. Now, usually you just go straight on, you log on, they call you in whenever you need. That's fine. That's fantastic. So I think that in terms of saving money for the client, they're not paying me to go down there for an hour and a half to wait for something to get listed.
That's a very good
Also,
point.
it's just going to go do all your work that you have to do. So I think there are a lot of positives that come out of that, and I think that's something that they should be looking at maybe implementing full time.
Having said that, shameless plug on my weekly blog called Hugh
What a block it is.
Shameless. I was speaking about this and I was complaining about not being back in the courtroom.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is I feel that a result of COVID is that practitioners and the court became a little bit more understanding and a little bit more amicable in relation to, people not being ready, people not being prepared, witnesses not having everything together, affidavits not being filed. The list goes on because the throwaway lines will COVID.
Yeah, that's very true. Very true.
So I think that I'm happy to be back in the courtroom because people are properly being held to account again.
Yeah.
Like all of us, I'm happy that COVID broadly with vaccinations occurring, unless you're an anti-vaxxer, let's not go there. Opening up the economy and letting people get back into the courtrooms like normal, I think it will have a benefit to progressing matters. But I do agree that in terms of saving time and money, there's great benefit to systematic changes that we've seen in the court system as a result of it.
I agree. I think so. I don't know, it's interesting.
Do you think that there is any, I'll give you my views. I think that directions hearings and small interlocutory hearings are good to have in an online medium because it does save a lot of time and money and not everyone has to go to court for the day.
I agree.
What do you think about final hearings for judges like yourself?
In my experience,
Yes.
don't like it at all. And I think it would depend on the matter. I think I do a lot of personal injury law. I think in those sort of matters where you're getting extensive witness evidence from doctors, plaintiffs and defendants, all will have several witnesses.
Yes.
You need that face-to-face. You need to be able to see body language. You need to be able to see the person. And you also need to be able to, I think, also being able to navigate your way through the bar table as well with the other people is really important. And you lose that, from my experience, when you're through video.
No.
You don't get any of that kind of that background information that you do get when you're privy to in the court. I think on the other hand as well, I think people losing jury trials as well through the ACT was a huge issue in the criminal sphere. We didn't have to deal with that as much, but that was what they were saying, is your access to justice and the way that those hearings were running were just completely different, and it threw off every procedural element that they previously had.
Yes.
But I reckon, overall, I think as long as you kept the final hearings in there and maybe the larger interlocks, you'd be fine.
No, I agree. Just to address some comments, coffee and a case note, good to see you as always. Yes, we're with you. Good branding, and also truth.
It's a little between two ferns.
It is. And Mina, to answer your question, I feel like we're addressing that now, and I might extrapolate a little bit on Jordan's point, and that is that I feel that a hearing is slightly prejudicial, to use the word, but I think that the law is a result of the human condition. And it was created face-to-face, person-to-person, jury trials and all of those things. And there have been studies done, and I think we all know it through our experience, that online court and online meetings change the vibe. You lose cues, you lose the ability to interact with people in ways you otherwise would. And I think that, whether or not that's seen on paper in the final, at the end of a hearing, and whether or not it changes what the decision is, it certainly changes the way that the law is perceived, the way that people interact with each other, and the way that the law has been since time immemorial. So I think that it will go back to in-person hearings. But as I said, if it's an interlocutory hearing about whether or not I need to amend pleadings, that can be done online. So that's okay.
Yeah.
If it's a final hearing with witnesses or with points of law, everyone's got their barristers and their tons of junior lawyers, and I think it should be in court before a judge. It always has been.
Sure. How did you find? I remember you had a matter.
Yes.
ACAT, I believe.
Yes.
It was a cross-examination that you did over the phone.
Yes, for 3.5 hours.
How was that?
Unpleasant. Unpleasant. And the reason for that is, as we know, cross-examination is a skill. It takes a long time to develop, and a lot of it goes off cues, visual cues, not audio cues. And if you're on a roll and all of a sudden everyone starts speaking over the top of each other, in court that can be powerful. On the phone, it's just confusing.
Yeah.
And it's easy to lose your train of thought, and it's easier for the witness or the person being cross-examined to lose their train of thought as well.
Yep.
So I got out of that, and I could barely move.
I also think in those sorts of circumstances, a magistrate is less likely to cut across someone when they're on the phone or online, as opposed to when you're in the courtroom. Yeah. They'll just go, none of that. Also, I think you lose a lot of the direction you get from judges and magistrates when they're just body language, just being like, oh, they are not picking this up. They are not going with me right now. And you change tact. And you're like, this is maybe not where we're going to need to head on this argument.
That's a very good point. You go down the wrong route. Yeah. I have to say, as you know, Jordan, I had a personal matter in which I was the plaintiff. A small civil matter.
The king of ACAT.
That's ongoing. And I was cross-examined in that matter, so personal experience. And I found it very easy to bat away and confuse silly questions. And there was no guidance, as you say, provided.
Yep.
And in the end, we went down a whole lot of rabbit holes, none of which ended up being relevant, which I think could have been addressed much easier where we all face-to-face and looking at each other.
Yeah.
So that makes a lot of sense. The next point of order is, I suppose, your preferred medium, and I'll invite questions.
Sure.
From all of the viewers. Do you prefer, Jordan, I don't know, I have a huge list, but Google Hangouts, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, that's all I have.
I think anything with a cat filter on my face get me going there. No, I reckon, look, Microsoft Teams I think has been ideal. WebEx was a nightmare initially, but it's come through later on, I think. Yeah, I reckon Microsoft Teams for me. What about you? Just because you've got the chat element in there as well.
Chat element is useful. I have always felt more comfortable on Zoom for a reason that I cannot quite describe.
Just feels right.
It feels right to me. Filters are much easier to use, I find. Yeah. Like Teams is good, but it's a bit buggy. Filters on Zoom are good. We would have all heard the story about the lawyer in the United States who had a cat filter for half of his hearing and didn't know how to turn it
But
off.
also just committed to it, which I give him a lot of props for, to be like, I'm ready to go, let's proceed, which is just incredible.
Exactly, I agree.
I would melt there. You just, I don't know what's going to
At some point you need to call it. And I guess we've had some issues with the mediums that we've been using. So we would have heard the story about, I believe it was a judge in the UK who started talking behind the scenes about how he felt about some of the evidence.
Oh, yeah.
And was asked to recuse themselves.
Yep.
And then you were telling me the other day, Jordan, about, broadly issues with technology. And
there was one in California with an education board where they hadn't realised they'd already entered the meeting and were essentially talking about the parents that were involved in the meeting that was upcoming, saying some pretty nasty things about drug use and them and more other stuff that I probably won't mention here, but ended up having to resign. The entire board had to resign as a result. So I don't know, I think there's this unanticipated effects of all of this where people probably didn't see any of this coming, and it's I don't know, some of the falls from it have been pretty unglorious.
Oh, yeah, it happened to us just before, Jordan. We were shooting the breeze, and all of a sudden we were recording.
So we were just in, mate. Exactly.
Lucky nothing too controversial was said. And Mina, in answer to your question, in terms of the implementation of VR systems, I think they've been implemented quite well recently. I remember some years ago it was borderline impossible to get a video link to a court. And I also remember you'd have to, other practitioners, please if you're watching, tell your stories to know more than me, but I remember that you would have to go to a courtroom in the New South Wales Supreme Court at least, and federal, and sit in there to be linked into another court. Whereas now I got an invite the other day from an associate to a judge being like, we're using Teams, see you there. And I think it's great.
I think it's fantastic.
So I think
particularly I do a lot of the AAT and the federal and the FWC as well, and they're great. All of it's done on that at the moment. It's fantastic.
I think everyone's getting used to it. But having said that, on my vlog, Hugh's Hunch, I said
I feel like I need to plug something now. You've double plugged. You've outdone me.
There was a comment from Gillian Yeend, who was in our family law team in Chamberlains, and Gillian said that it has been pleasant not to get ambushed in court with random exhibits that other practitioners hand up. Oh, yeah. So, I mean, it's often the case, sometimes the case, that you go to court, you're all prepared, you've got it all sorted, you know what your arguments are going to be, and all of a sudden 3 or 4 documents get handed up. And you have to backtrack or redo your entire case.
Yeah, on the fly.
On the fly. And it's often the case, to lead into another issue, it's often the case, or it is the case, that during cross-examine, tender a document. And then, you know, ask questions about that document, tender another one, ask questions about that. Whereas if we have an online hearing with a witness these days, documents need to be tendered the night before, so everyone has them, which means everyone looks through them.
Yeah, interesting. Surely the next step with that is going to have to be like a Dropbox, so you're putting that on as you go. Like, I'm tendering this, putting it into the Dropbox. Everyone sees it, right?
I think it's a very good idea. I think you should be in charge of some.
Hey, my tech background, get me in the coding room. I'm ready to go.
It would only work well on the course, I'm sure. Exactly. So I think that there's been benefit to that, because at least you know what the case is before you, and there is something to be said about not being ambushed. And I wouldn't call that an ambush, because it's a fact that's known. That's why it's allowed, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, you're better off having all your cards on the table and you have a fight about it on the day.
Yeah.
Rather than, you know, holding cards in your pocket and trying to get away with it that way.
Definitely.
But, you know, then that takes away from some of the skill of our adversarial system.
Well, that's what we're paid for, essentially, is using those tactical moments to sometimes be like, look, this is probably going to work better if I pull this out on the day as opposed to the night before. But interesting.
So there's a question for everyone watching. Use eBrief. Thank you, Chris. We could definitely use eBrief.
eBrief's fantastic.
That's a very good idea. I think
I tried it, but that's great.
Yeah,
it's really good.
With that, I think more broadly, although not specifically linked to advocacy, but let's say document management, I think it's forced a lot of firms. We were pretty good at it, and we were lucky. But I think it's forced a lot of firms to become more comfortable with electronic document management. I know in the Supreme Court in Queensland, they're already very good at it. The court forces you to. But I think it's made everyone much more cognizant about how documents are managed, instead of coming to court with 50 folders that everyone has to trawl through. You know, it was already in place, but it's forced people to be more cognizant.
The best thing ever is AAT, subpoena material. You used it to go in, just to trek over there, do it all. You get locked in a room, you get all the subpoena material, you do it all yourself. They now just do it for you. It's fantastic. It's amazing. Both parties agree, you just both get an email. I don't know, someone over in the registry there just has the job of photocopying 1 million pages.
Next online thing in the ACT, I think we need. Yeah, online subpoenas.
It's great.
That makes sense. Another point that we wrote down earlier, Jordan, is whether or not we feel that COVID has had an effect on access to justice. I feel like more broadly from a macro view, it has, in terms of people having less money to throw around at court. I feel that it's been less accessible for people as well. I mean, you know, normally just typical self-represented litigant can go to court, learn on the fly really before a judge, and everyone will be more lenient. If you have to do that online, I feel like it's more difficult as well.
Because there's another process you have to go through getting that all set up. Maybe, I don't know. I feel like there's been a lot more self-reps in this process though, because I think there's not as many coming through, but it'll be interesting to see towards this back end. I think we're going to see a lot more self-reps. But yeah, I agree. I think access to justice wise, I think there's a lot of arguments in the criminal space about that at the moment, but I probably can't comment on those as well.
In terms of the jury trials.
In terms of the jury trials and judge alone, and the access to whether they should have even allowed those through is interesting.
Yes. So for those of you who don't know, the jury trials have been gotten rid of.
They got waived for a short period. So there were some trials that usually would have been run with a jury that ended up being judge alone. So there was a large amount of debate in the ACT as to whether that should occur and whether that changed the nature of people being able to access justice in the proper way. Because I know in New South Wales, you're able to actually make some applications in relation to whether you want a jury or judge alone. Same with the ACT, but essentially that was just waived and it was all judge alone. So it changed the way that a lot of those parties were preparing for trials when they're usually preparing for a jury.
Yes. Well, I think we should have our own TV show. Thank you for that comment.
It's
Got that on an angle. On an angle.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah,
there you
camera.
go.
I agree. It's a nice setting.
We should have started on the fly. Should have started on the fly. Hot down.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the entrance we missed.
And I think, interestingly, I was expecting personally more cases. There was a couple in the ACT, but more cases around people not complying with court rules and court procedure and COVID.
Yeah.
And I think that might be an extrapolation of, or the ones that I read had something to do with limitation dates more than anything, which makes sense.
Yeah.
But there weren't many in terms of interlocutory hearings as to parties' conduct.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that is because everyone was a bit more understanding.
Well, yeah, I think with your debt collection ones as well, I feel like people are just throwing hands up and going, COVID.
Yeah.
It has just been like the platform at the moment that everything's been built on for those guys. So.
Yes. But I think, as we'd all be experiencing, work's picking up across many sectors.
Yeah.
And I find that we're almost back to as it was in terms of expectations of turnaround case management, how the court's going to perceive things.
Definitely.
Because if it was 6 months ago, I'd be like, well, it's not going to happen, it's COVID. Whereas now, like, yep, it's done.
We'll get 12 months turnaround, it has to be done.
Yeah, well, it's sorted. And I find that it's not happening that quickly yet. Yeah. There's still a bit of a hangover. And I think that will stay around for a while, or at least till we have certainty around the vaccine. I mean, God forbid we're in Victoria, which Chamberlains does not have an office in Victoria.
Not yet.
Very soon.
Not yet.
Yeah, I'll get your eyes peeled. Ears to the ground. But poor Victorians, you get locked down often. You have the big lockdown. There was a lockdown not long ago. I mean, there's always that concern. I mean, even in Sydney, the Northern Beaches, that got locked down as well, which affected a number of jury trials from what I saw. That were in the papers because they lost jury members because even jury members weren't allowed to travel.
That's true.
So
I've spoken to a few personal injury lawyers down there who just said it just became so hard because obviously we need a heap of medical evidence, but a lot of those doctors just didn't know how to handle doing non-face-to-face appointments for a long time. Particularly when you're looking at horrific accidents like knees and backs and stuff, where you actually need to be in there having a physical examination. There was no ways that those were going to be able to occur, and when they were, there was a huge backlog because they also had to have the appropriate scans. So I think that space, and that's a space that I work a large amount in, there was certainly a backlog, particularly in Victoria and in New South Wales in some parts as well.
Yes, I feel like that was a plug, Jordan. Two subtle plugs.
Two subtle
plugs. Now, in an area that I work in, we had this was during, it would have been about April, mid last year. We had an expert, and that expert was based in Victoria. Borders were absolutely closed. And there was a site inspection in Western Sydney. And as a result of that expert, it wasn't ours, thank goodness, but that expert had to be dumped and had to brief someone else.
Sure.
And that resulted in about a 3 or 4 month delay. But unfortunately, there was just nothing that could be done.
Yeah.
And as you say, it depends on the area of law, on the area of expertise, and whether or not there needs to be visual. But in that one, they did. And that absolutely is what it is. Yes, I'm waiting for James to show up as well. I was on the phone to him earlier. Unfortunately, he's very much not around.
You always think he's going to bust through a window like the Kool-Aid guy on those.
So as we did the other day, see me everywhere but not Snapchat.
I did like.
It's like I see us everywhere, but probably not Facebook. And I guess another good thing is they allowed, or courts throughout the country allowed witnessing documents from a computer screen. What a wonderful and amazing world we live in.
That was a big one, actually.
Yeah. The amount of times that has been a problem in all of our lives, I'm sure.
It was, yeah. I remember we had a big meeting about how we were actually going to play that out. That was as COVID was coming through. The lockdown was imminent. And we had several deeds that had to be witnessed, and how we were actually going to play that out. It was quite interesting. Yeah. So, I think that's a huge progression.
Yeah, and I think the court's been more lenient on not filing originals. We had a difficulty with limitation dates and supporting affidavits, and the court was very understanding, which was quite helpful. So I think a lot of common sense has come out of COVID. But at the same time, there have been some negatives. We've rattled on about how slow things have been. Are there any other significant negatives, Jordan, that you can identify in terms of how everyone has adapted to COVID and things that are lingering?
I don't think so at the moment. I think some people sit on their hands a little bit, like we were saying, and say, I haven't been able to do this because of the backlog of COVID. But other than that, I think there's been a lot of positives. I think a lot of it's been positive.
Yes.
In terms of people's ability to take on these adaptations and take on these, technological advancements that I think, particularly in the ACT jurisdiction, they've probably been pushing back a little bit and then were forced their hand once this came in. And I think because of that, we probably jumped like a year ahead of where I thought we were going to be in terms of filing, in terms of access in those first erections hearings, which is fantastic.
Oh, we have a request, actually, Mr. Dafferty. See if you can actually jump in on this. Bear with us. We are switching to different content on different platforms.
What are you doing?
Oh, hello.
Oh, my God.
Hello. We'll flip us sideways. Mr. Dafferty.
If you speak my name,
It's 3 times in the mirror. There he is.
it tends to be what happens with the devil. I should get out of the way. You guys are doing a great job, and we're all really enjoying it. So hugely appreciate
Thank you.
Thank you, James. Pleasure to see you.
Nice to see you. Well, where else do we have to go with this, Hugh? I thought.
Okay, so we flip the camera for those of us on Instagram. I'm just going to roll with it now, and we don't have much further to go. I have a summary point which leads on. I agree that there have not been many negatives.
It's rare with you and I.
It is rare. This is very rare. I was hoping to find more, but I couldn't as you were speaking, unfortunately. I think that, so the takeaway from Jordan is COVID's been great. I think that...
the procedures.
I think that I have had more amicable and pleasant conversations with fellow practitioners from March 2020 to now than I've ever had, and I think I ever will. Because I think that between many practitioners, I know that I have it, there's a fear to pick up the phone in case they take you, we've all had a bad experience. You call someone, have a chat, and all of a sudden it's coming back to you in the form of a letter and an application.
That's very true, actually.
So I feel that throughout COVID, there has been an understanding where people actually want to speak to each other, see how practitioners do, see how they're going, see how each other's clients are going, and genuinely try and sort it out. The way that we're meant to be. We all have obligations. There are solicitors' rules. We're meant to behave well with each other. Sometimes we don't. But I think that this has reminded me that the person on the other side is but a person as well. They have their own feelings, and if you can form a relationship, a professional relationship, or even a friendship with someone on the other side, it'll get a better result for both of your clients as well. And if it won't, then at least you can have an honest conversation like, my client says.
That's true. Actually, that's true. When you call them up, there's no great even. There's no better evener than complaining about something that isn't that matter. Being like, this bullshit with COVID is driving me up the wall. And then like, me too. It's killing me. And then, you're suddenly on the even playing field. Anyway, how do we deal with this? And you're on the same page.
And we're all friends. Yeah. I agree. So I think that there have been overwhelming positives. And as Jordan said, it's progressed technology a lot. It's progressed the way that lawyers perceive the courtroom. People were talking about it for decades. We live in a world of wonderful technology. It's going to change the way we do things. And nothing ever changed. And then there was complaints. We never changed. Now we have. We've worked out what we like, what we don't.
Yep.
And I think that in terms of practice moving forward, we still need to reflect on those lessons, because it's not like we're through COVID. There still may be issues. Who knows? The rest of the world's having these issues all the time. Australia's very lucky. But now is a good time for us as Australian practitioners to take stock, work out what we think the benefits have been from working remotely, and what the problems have been as well. I mean, I know personally it can be quite isolating. As a solicitor, it's helpful being in litigation because I need a team, so I'm always on the phone to someone. But it can also be very isolating, especially, when I'm at home before a court appearance, having a freak out and don't have anyone to talk to.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
That's quite
around the house. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
It's quite unpleasant as well.
Yeah, I know. Actually, I know. I drove my housemates insane with that sometimes. Just having conversations, walking around the house,
Yes.
or in court, just walking around the house with the headphones on. That's it.
So I think that'll do us. It's enough of our ramblings. I thank you all very, very much for being here. I thank Mr. James Dappergy of our office
What
and
an
of Coffee and a
appearance.
Case Note. Yeah, amazing.
I don't know how he hacked into the system. Amazing.
It's incredible, and I thank you for being here, Jordan. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you. Always.
We should do this again. Please give us your feedback. We quite enjoy doing these things. There will be a recording of this video, absolutely. And we will make sure that is posted on all of the socials, so we can watch this ad nauseum and learn all of the pearls of wisdom that we have imparted today.
On Blu-ray here.
Exactly.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
One for the books. All right, we'll log off. We thank you all for your attendance, and ask that you please ask any questions that you may have, probably in the comments when we post on either any of the socials, or otherwise pick up the phone and have a chat, because obviously Jordan and I like doing that as well. Cool. We'll see you guys soon. Thank you.
Thank you.